I'm Randy and I make candy, and today I'm making fire. Stick around. Greetings, my confectionery cadre, and welcome to Randy Makes Candy, where I help you make tasty treats that people love to eat. Today I'm making creme brulee fudge. This is at the request of a former coworker and dear friend of mine, so thanks for the suggestion, Caress. If there's something you'd like to see me make, please let me know in the comment section. Okay, let's make this happen. First, what do you need to create this? Don't worry about writing it down. The ingredients and amounts are listed below. You can also find this information at randymakescandy.com. Someone asked me why I do my measurements by weight instead of volume, grams instead of cups and tablespoons. The answer is precision, and I'll explain more about that after I show you the recipe. I'll also share an app that I use to make converting kitchen measurements super easy. Speaking of sharing, if you like what's happening here in the Candy Kitchen, please like, subscribe, and share. For this recipe, you'll need 350 mils or grams of cream, 60 grams of corn syrup, 1/4 teaspoon of salt, 30 grams of butter cut into small cubes, 13 grams of vanilla extract, and 675 grams plus 14 grams of sugar. I'm using baker's sugar here, also known as caster sugar, because the granules are smaller, which helps the sugar dissolve a little more quickly. If you're not familiar with baker's sugar, it's kind of the midpoint between regular granulated sugar and powdered sugar. Some recipes require baker's sugar, but for most candy recipes, including this one, plain old granulated sugar will work just fine. You'll also need an 8x8 pan, parchment paper or nonstick foil, a saucepan, a wooden spoon or spatula, and a candy thermometer. If you'd like information about the thermometer I use, you can check out my video on English toffee. Okay, let's make some candy. Line just the bottom of an 8x8 pan with parchment or nonstick foil. You can also use regular foil and just grease it with butter. Combine the cream, corn syrup, and salt in a saucepan and heat gently over a medium-low heat. Add the 675 grams of sugar in 3 or 4 parts. Don't use that extra 14 grams, that's for later. Continue stirring until all of the sugar is dissolved. Be patient, it'll take about 10 minutes. Once the sugar is dissolved, increase the heat to medium-high, clip on a candy thermometer, and cook without stirring until the mixture reaches 114 degrees Celsius or 237 Fahrenheit. This is probably as good a point as any to tell you that this recipe gave me no small amount of trouble. If you saw my English toffee video, you may remember that I cautioned against using a pan that was too small, as the mixture could boil over, leaving you with a sticky mess. I almost made that mistake here. Once the candy started boiling, it came to within about an inch of the top of the pan, then settled down. But I was still 20 degrees short of the final temperature, so I became a little concerned. I lowered the temperature to medium and took the pan off the stove for a few seconds just to let things simmer down. I never actually had a boil over, and I might have been okay, but next time I will definitely use a larger pan. Okay, back to the recipe. Once you're up to temperature, remove the pan from the heat, leaving the thermometer in place, and place it on a cooling rack. Drop in the cubes of butter, but don't stir. When the mixture cools to 52 degrees Celsius, 125 Fahrenheit, transfer the mixture to the bowl of an electric mixer fitted with the paddle attachment, add the vanilla, and beat on low speed. It'll be very loose to start off with, but it'll eventually start to thicken. What you want is for it to look more like soft cookie dough. I mixed this batch for about 20 minutes. This is a very imprecise way of measuring the readiness of this recipe, and it's one of the reasons I don't make it very often, even though it really is worth the effort. Scrape the fudge into the pan and smooth the top with a spatula. Leave it room temperature for several hours or overnight until firm. I let it sit on the counter overnight. The next morning I discovered that it was still pretty soft, so I put it in the fridge for about 3 hours, and that seemed to help. Once it's set, place the pan on a heat-proof surface and sprinkle the top of the fudge with that extra sugar that you kept aside. Heat it with a culinary torch until the sugar bubbles and caramelizes. Allow the fudge to cool and become firm again. Turn the fudge out onto a parchment-covered cutting board. Here's where I had another spot of difficulty. I'd removed the parchment from the fudge so I could caramelize the sugar without burning the parchment, but that caused the fudge to stick to the pan, so it was really difficult to remove. I ended up using a flexible spatula to go down the sides and under the fudge to loosen it. That's why I now suggest only lining the bottom of the pan. Okay, let's finish up here. Leave the fudge upside down to make cutting neater. Cut it into squares. Be gentle and go slow so you don't chip the caramelized sugar off of the fudge. Okay, these are ready. Let's try one. Slanchiva. That is so totally worth the effort. That is just delicious. It's the fudge is nice and creamy and just tasty. Good vanilla flavor there. That caramelized sugar gives it a nice crunch. Yeah, totally, so totally worth the effort. So let's talk measurement. Now, most of the time when you're making candy, if your measurements are a bit off, it really doesn't make much difference. Not like bread baking, for example, where the ratio of water to flour makes a huge difference. But I'm a big fan of reproducibility. If I find a recipe that works, I want it to be the same every time. I read an interesting article on the website Kitchen Heals Soul. I've linked it below if you'd like to take a look. The part I found most interesting was where she said that depending on how you fill your measuring cup with flour, the weight might vary from less than 100 grams to over 160 grams. And this isn't just her opinion. She quotes sources from Alton Brown to America's Test Kitchen. Now, you may have spent a lot of time in the kitchen and you found a method that works for you. I'm not saying you should change. People have used measurements by volume in cooking since Al opened his first Bronto burger stand. But when I give a measurement in grams, you'll know exactly how much of that ingredient I used. So there's one less variable in how the recipe will turn out. Having said that, I occasionally use a volume measurement for very small amounts of something. For example, this recipe calls for a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. That converts to 1.52 grams, and my scale just isn't that precise, so volume measurements certainly have a place in my kitchen. Since a lot of recipes out there only have measurements by volume, I end up doing a lot of conversions. I found an app that makes it super easy. This one's only for Android, but I'm sure there's something similar for those of you out there whose phones are a bit more fruity. The app is called Cupful. They're not a sponsor, I just love the app and I think you might find it helpful. It is a unitasker, sorry Alton, but it does that one task really, really well. I just mentioned that a 1/4 teaspoon of salt weighs 1.52 grams. I found that out by opening Cupful, entering salt into the search bar, entering 1/4, selecting teaspoon from the first drop-down menu, then selecting grams from the other drop-down menu. And there's your answer. When entering amounts, you can either type in the decimal or you can select the handy fraction button on the side. If you want 2/3 of something, just hit the 1/3 button twice. It's fast, it's simple, and it works. What more could you ask? If you enjoyed our time together, please like, share, and subscribe. Click the bell if you'd like to be notified when new videos come out. I'd love to hear about your results if you try this recipe, as well as suggestions for what you'd like to see in future videos. And I was thinking, it's never been proven that candy cures the common cold, but I'm open to the possibility. I hope you'll join me next time. So, let's talk measurement. No. I end up using a flesh... Now, most of the time when you're making candy, if your measurements are... No. If your measurements are a bit off, it really doesn't make much difference. Doggone it. I'm sure there's something similar for those of you whose phones... I just mentioned that a 1/4 tablespoon of... You know, you get to the end of this thing and you get tired, and I don't know.